Greetings, fellow Earthlings.
Здравствуйте, люди.
Thank you, Nick. Welcome to episode number 6 of the Amateur Conversationalist. I am joined today by Nicholas Lamar Soutter, author of The Water Thief. How are you today, Nick?
Well, thank you. How about yourself?
Doing well. Little tired. Was up late last night and did a stream earlier on Nakasuchi's channel, A Raging Atheist, with Faye the Most Gracious, an ex-Muslim. I urge people to go check that out. And want to say hello to Tony Designs and Oshkosh Bajosh in the live chat there. Thank you for stopping by. So as people who have been here before know, the mission statement of this channel is we bring YouTubers on and we try and talk about things that maybe perhaps the wider YouTube community does not know about that individual. Before we move forward, though, I do want to announce something that I announced on Nakasuchi's channel earlier. I have been inspired by many ex-Muslims who I've interacted with on Twitter, and as well my friend Faye the Most Gracious. And I have decided that on this channel, when I created it, it was to have these one-on-one discussions such as we're about to have and the previous 5 that I've had. And the other part of it was going to be perhaps to have 2 individuals on for streams where 2 individuals might be at odds with one another over something. I have decided not to do that. Have not done that yet, and I'm going to forget about that part of it. Stay away from the drama type of broadcast, and instead, I want to dedicate this channel to having ex-Muslims on to tell their stories and to talk about leaving the Muslim faith, why they left the Muslim faith, and the ramifications of being an apostate, Muslim apostate. So be looking for that in the future. We will still do these, and then we will also add those in the near future. And I would imagine that my first guest on such a stream will be Faye the Most Gracious. As I said, and one other thing real quick before we get started. You may notice in the live chat, I linked a GoFundMe. And that is Puffalopagus, someone you've seen on streams that I do on other channels, and he's in different streams around YouTube. Been around for years in the community. Last week, his father passed away, and he is having a tough time coming up with the money for the funeral. And so if you can help him, please check out that GoFundMe and help with what you can. Also, please, it would help so greatly if you're able to help him out. If you want to exponentially increase your help to him, please share the GoFundMe link on social media. If everybody who heads over to GoFundMe, shares it with 5 or 6 of their friends on Facebook or Twitter or something of that nature, it would help in a great way. So, Nicholas Lamar Soutter, the thing that I found out about him recently that I did not know is that he speaks a couple of languages besides English. And actually used to speak more than a couple, but through not using them over the years, he has lost his ability to speak a couple of them. He, of course, despite what some might claim, speaks English. And as well, he can speak Russian, as you saw at the top of the show. He translated my opening line into Russian. And he speaks Spanish. The 2 that he learned back in college that he has lost, and maybe only has maybe a rudimentary ability in are Japanese and French. I was hoping that he still had the Japanese, because that's the one that's most interesting to me. But
I can do the basic thing. 日本語がわかりますか? ちょっとわかりません. Just the sort of, very basic phrases is all I've got left. I can't even read katakana anymore.
Right. And Nick informed me at the before we went live, and hello to Tartan Snowflake in the live chat. Thank you so much for that comment. Nick informed me just before we started too, which is even more interesting to me, and I'll let him explain how this is. But you wouldn't think that this would be with a man named Nicholas Lamar Soutter, but he informed me that Spanish, in fact, was his first language. Could you explain that to the audience, Nick?
Sure, and in fact, actually, I had this discussion in Russian on our stream. We had on, who was it? Not that long ago, and he mentioned that Russian was his first language. And so I asked him in Russian how on earth that was, and if he was from Russia, and he said no, actually it was his parents. He was born in San Diego. So that's the translation for the conversation we had, because we never translated it a short while back. And then I said, okay, the same thing happened with me in Spanish, Spanish is actually my first language. I'm also dyslexic, phenomenally dyslexic, and the reason those two are related is because it took me an extra year in school to really sort of catch up, especially with my reading, because I hadn't learned English. At around 4 or 5, I was really starting to learn English, and I was getting quite good at it. You'd never think it wasn't my native language, but it's not. What happened was both my parents worked, and my mother, oh God, was an extraordinarily difficult human being. And my father was more than happy to stay home with us and let her have a job. She was really very keen on having a career, but she felt that no, a man does not stay home. So they both worked. And the only person I could find to take care of my sister and myself was a Guatemalan woman named Maria Teresa. And she had 2 sons, Julio and Jose. And we would, on the weekdays actually, that my parents would wake us up at like 4 a.m., drop us off at her house, and she actually had a room for each of us, so we'd get into a bed and go to sleep there, and then wake up, spend the day with them, and then go to bed in that room, or go to sleep in that room. And then our parents would come late at night, snag us, and take us back to our. That was the routine for 2 or 3 years. My father and his father did not get along well at all. Unfortunately, my grandfather and my father didn't get along well at all, and they hadn't seen each other for a few years. And my grandfather thought that sort of everything was always a dig at him, and so for his first time meeting me, and it hadn't crossed anybody's mind that I didn't speak the language. It's his first time meeting me, and he goes, "Oh, hi, young Nicky, how are you?" And I just turned to my father and said, ¿qué es eso? No sé qué es eso. ¿Qué es? Él está hablando. No puedo comprender. And he just turns to my father and goes, "You did this on purpose, you son of a bitch." So that was it. I was exposed. Now my father practiced law actually in 6 languages, and could speak Spanish fluently. It was no problem. My mother couldn't speak it as well, but enough that, and I think they wanted to speak English around the house, but because the only language we were being exposed to during our waking hours was Spanish, that was all we could. Eventually, they're just like, no, the only way we can talk to these kids is if we speak Spanish. So we just spoke Spanish around the house. And when I went to school, it became a problem. So I had to learn English. My Spanish, I ended up, my Spanish has always been reasonably strong. As a result of that, I ended up taking some Spanish in high school. It was a cakewalk. I mean, it was just like, okay, I can do this in my sleep. And then, so that was it. That's Spanish, first language.
And have you been to any of the countries in which these languages are spoken?
Yeah. So while I was in high school, I started failing out of high school, and the general consensus was that I was an idiot. my father was like, no, he's not an idiot. If you talk to him, he's not an idiot. And they kept trying to pull back the amount of work I was doing. I said, I think we need to add the work he's doing. He's getting bored. That's the problem. So I took college courses in astrophysics, Russian, Japanese, what else? I took computer science. So I started taking these courses. My grades started going up across the board. So I learned Russian and Japanese while I was in high school, had Spanish, had French, which I'd learned in middle school. I decided I really wanted to go to Russia. I spent a month in Russia, was one of the last Americans out of the country. It was actually the Soviet Union at the time. I was one of the last Americans. I think I was number 12 out of the country before it collapsed. And I mean, literally, I got on a plane from the Soviet Union, and by the time we landed, there was no Soviet Union anymore. But I almost got shot on the way out over a dispute on how much I should have bribed a customs official. That was something.
Yeah, you have to be well versed in bribery in many foreign nations.
You do, and I was not. And the guy was looking for a bribe, and I didn't catch it, and then he got kind of ticked at me. Everyone else in the party was really good at bribing people. I was just sort of like, huh? Are you sure he wants money? And I knew intellectually that that's how it works over there. But when it came down to it, I could not bribe a customs official. I was like, I'm just not going to do it. But all my friends were like, oh, sure, here you go. A couple of dollars, done.
And in those countries, they just think of it as tipping. They're just looking for their tip. So as I mentioned at the top, you're the author of The Water Thief, and I believe others as well.
I've only published 2. I've written a number, but I've only, as of this moment, published 2. The other one is Confessions of a Sin Eater, which is the autobiography or the biography of a maximum security prison psychologist. He was a psychologist for 10 years. This one's called Confessions of a Sin Eater. He encountered a very serious problem, which is he really wanted to do his job well. But in order to be a good psychologist, you have to connect with the person that you're trying to help. Well, the people he was trying to connect with were some of the worst human beings. This was actually, Walpole was a supermax facility at the time. So, and they were taking a body out of there a week. It was an extraordinarily violent place. And it was, in fact, Mailer wrote a book, When the Prisoners Ran Walpole, that centers around it. Well, sort of before this period, but it's a brutal place. And I got to meet a lot of interesting people for that one. So,
well, and you kind of set me back there because when you said autobiography at first, I thought perhaps you were coming out on the show as the Sin Eater.
No, it was his biography, and he had done a very good job writing it, actually, but it wasn't quite to the level where it could be published, and he needed help, and so I just joined him. It was really his memoir, but the biggie was he ended up, it destroyed him. It absolutely destroyed him. Learning about what these people had done, learning that in many cases they had no remorse, learning some of their darkest secrets, and how you can actually, if you go to Quora right now and say what's the worst thing you've ever been told as a psychologist, I use one of his stories, and I should still have the #1 ranking on that. And I did on a scale of 1 to 10 a 7, the worst story ever. I'm saying that when I can't publish the 10. It'll give you, it changes your life knowing what these people have done and what they're capable of. And they're not very nice people. I'm also now 1 degree. I'm 5 degrees fewer separated from Charles Manson than I'd like to be. I was very glad when he passed away because he was not a fan of mine.
I see your in-time partner is in the house, Ansgar Odison. Welcome, Maya Atkinson. The reason I asked about your books is to ask you this: have your books been translated into other languages?
Not that I'm aware of. I got a bizarre call from Romania once where they suggested that they were reading it in Romanian over there, but I kind of doubt that. I don't know what the hell that was about, but not to the best of my knowledge.
Okay, so it's not anything you did when you published, just to have them translated into other languages.
Nope.
So now, we can go into a broader discussion, of linguistics in general, and I want to ask you now, because I've heard this from other people that speak different languages. But does the fact that you are, fluent in a couple of different languages, does that allow you to rudimentarily understand or communicate in other related languages?
I can get close. And I'm really I wouldn't call myself fluent in them anymore. I can carry on a pretty decent conversation. I can converse without any real difficulty. But fluency is a level even beyond that. If I have to communicate with someone from Czechoslovakia, sometimes I can get that done. What was the other one that's actually Ukrainian is reasonably close. Now, some of the words in Ukrainian that aren't similar to Russian are in fact actually similar to either Spanish or English, believe it or not. And so, if you're just constantly trying to process and running through every possible language that you're aware of, that you can sit there and say, where is this word coming from? Where's maybe the root, and try to figure out where it is. Usually, you can fill in enough missing words with your understanding too. I mean, I have a friend who's Portuguese, doesn't speak any English, and we can communicate. I mean, Portuguese is not Spanish. They're from Brazil, but we can communicate. And every now and then we get stuck on something, but for the most part, we can communicate reasonably well.
Well, and want to say hello to Maynard Sage, just joined us, and Dave McGinnis. And Dave McGinnis, that's right, long time no chat. And just so you know, you might remember I told you when I started this channel, I want to get you on here, and you are definitely on the list for that.
It'd be good, yeah.
Hopefully sometime here in the near future. Yeah, talking with Dave is always fascinating. And I also see that I have broken the fourth wall and forgot to turn my camera off before we started. Guess no sense in turning it off at this point. No horse face today. But please give me your thoughts on that in the live chat and in the comment section, whether you are dismayed at not seeing the horse avatar and having to look at my ugly face. Now, when you talk about language, and you say, well, you're not necessarily fluent in Russian and Spanish, but I guess you would term it as you are conversational understanding.
Yeah, I can easily carry on a conversation.
I mean, you go and talk to somebody who speaks Russian or Spanish, they're not going to stump you with something. You're going to be able to understand what they say and
for the most part,
and communicate back with them. Hello, Misha Griffith. Thank you so much for stopping by. But of course, when you're communicating with folks, that's what it's all about. As long as they understand you and you understand them. If you're making mistakes in grammar or whatever, it really doesn't matter. It's all about whether you can understand one another, whether you're able to communicate back and forth. And, when you, and maybe this is something you know more about than I, but I know that in the past when, it's so long since I've been to school, when you talk about etymology and the origin of languages, it's almost kind of looks like a phylogeny tree, from evolution, because we have all these different languages now, and as you trace them back, they come from just a handful of sources. And can you help me out here, Nick? Like I know, don't they trace back to either Latin or Germanic?
Latin's a big. You've got Indo-European languages. You've got the Slavic languages. You've got Romance languages. So you've got different groups of languages that have common roots. And what I find most interesting about it is they do appear to evolve, sort of very much like you said, like the phylogeny tree. They do evolve, and in the same way, even that organisms evolve. They evolve for getting a higher level of efficiency in operating in the environment. Now, the environment may be a social environment, but that's why, for example, what escapes most people's notice, I've found, is that the words that we most often use are in fact the shortest words. And you can see this happening on the internet, where the more often a phrase is used, eventually it will become a meme. Eventually it will be OMG. You know, it's what's called a pocapation. It's the shortening of words over time, and on the internet it happens at a much faster rate. So you can watch the internet, and you can watch language evolve on the internet in a way that's nobody's ever seen before, and it's absolutely fascinating. And you can tell what's important to a culture by what the shortest words are, because the shortest words are almost always the ones that are most often used. And that's why, so Wednesday used to, in fact, be pronounced, well, it was Wednesday, and then, was that really Odin? Yeah, that was probably Odin's Day. And that got shortened to Wednesday, and then just finally Wednesday. That's why the D is out. Knife, actually, the K was in fact pronounced. The reason the K is there is because it used to pronounce it. We don't anymore because it's a pain in the neck, and it just dropped from. And most words in English is really bad about that. In Russian, they actually enforce spelling rules, and their dictionaries over there are actually proscriptive. So they will sit there and say, this is how we're telling you to spell it. And they will change it, which is why spelling in Russian is a piece of cake. Russian's got 32 characters in the alphabet, and it's really everything spelled phonetically, and they enforce it. I was like, there is something to be said for that.
Yeah. I mean, go ahead.
Russian also doesn't have the verb to be in the present tense, doesn't have any proper pronouns. A and the doesn't exist in Russian. And if you think about it, that sounds strange. You don't actually need the verb to be, and we have it in English, but we haven't dropped it yet. It's gotten very short, but in the present tense, you don't need it. And it's funny because I was translating at a summer camp once. It was actually an international summer camp, and I was doing translation into Russian. And the camp director was like, okay, I want you to translate everything that I say verbatim, which first of all is an insane and really idiotic request. But the other thing was, in Russian, because they have a case system and a separate declination system, you can say in 2 words what it takes 6 words to say in English. It's an extraordinarily efficient language that way. But, it'd say 6 words to me. I'd say 2 words to the guy I was translating to. It's like, did you say everything? I was like, yeah, I said everything. It didn't sound like you said it. I said everything. It's interesting when we get into cases. We have cases in English, but very few.
And, I just wonder, though, is, you talk about how over time words shorten, phrases shorten. We create shorthands for different idioms and phrases. I wonder if somewhere down the line, if language will simply devolve into a series of like clicks and grunts. So as you might see on the screen there, Kosh Bajosh, he and I'm not sure exactly what he means by this. For what I've heard, if you're fluent in English, Spanish, and Chinese, then you can pretty much communicate with 90% of the world. It seems Nick is beyond that. Now, and maybe you'll understand better. I don't know whether he means that 90% of the world either speaks or understands one of those languages, or if he's trying to say that if you know those 3 languages, then from there you can, discern the meaning of other languages.
No, I think he means that you can. 90% of the world speaks one of those languages. About 40% speaks English. I forget what the percentage is on Spanish, but it's actually reasonably high. And then Chinese, there's 1 billion Chinese, right? And in China, they don't necessarily acquire other languages as much as they do in other countries. Now, most countries, actually, English is required in one way or another. Many countries have, most industrialized countries, there are 36 industrialized countries, and most of them require English. So you'd be able to communicate reasonably well in all of those. If you speak Spanish, you'd be able to hit a bunch of places where English is maybe not as common, and then Chinese, English isn't going to be common in most parts of China, especially rural China. So if you speak those three, you can communicate with about 90% of the people alive today.
Yeah, and I never even thought of that until he had put that comment up. But it makes sense. I mean, what is there, like 1.1 billion Chinese people or more?
About 1/6 of the world's population. Well, that 1/6 number was like 10 years ago. It's changing rapidly. So
yeah.
I'll bet you so they have about 1/6 of the world's population. But the reason that speaking Chinese would be so critical to hitting that 90% number is because so many Chinese don't speak English. So if you don't learn Chinese, you've just eliminated 1/6 of the population you're not going to be able to speak with. English, you can find in almost all of the European countries. You can find, in Japan, everybody speaks English, so you don't need to speak Japanese. You want to speak to a Japanese person, you can do it with it. There's the old joke. What do you call someone who speaks 3 languages? Trilingual. What do you call someone who speaks 2 languages? Bilingual. What do you call someone who speaks 1 language? An American.
Boy, and that's very interesting too. And it's so funny because, as you said, there's, all these different countries. I think you said 36 industrialized countries that most everyone there learns English. And then here we have people that, mostly on the right, that become appalled that someone is speaking Spanish. And the funny part of it is in many of our southwestern states, the Spanish speakers were there first, and I'd say first from the standpoint of when Europeans came over and started taking over from the Native Americans. But, Spanish could make the case, Columbus quote discovered the Americas, that Spanish was being spoken on this continent, before English was.
Well, and Cortez and all the Spanish explorers, and we stole. I mean, we deliberately incited a war with Mexico in order to steal 2/3 of Texas and all of New Mexico, which we just wanted the land. So we essentially drummed up a war against them so we could take the land, and like, okay, we'll stop the war now. But we stole it. We absolutely stole it. And Spanish is seen as kind of we view French as kind of a snobbish language, and we view Spanish as a bit of a sort of a guttural language, and it's neither one you want to speak because who wants to be a snob and who wants to be in this sort of whatever the lower class, whatever it is that people are concerned about. So I learned Russian because our government said they were our enemies, and I said, okay, I didn't believe they were our enemies. I really didn't believe it. And I said, if they are, I want to speak the language. If they're not, then I really want to speak the language. And in either case, the people who speak the language are going to control it. Arabic is one of the ones I really wanted to learn and just haven't had the time.
So you might see the post that I put up on the screen there, something I was aware of. Is that something you were aware of, Nick?
Oh, Jesus, yeah.
Okay.
Well, they do utilize gender. I would disagree. They do utilize gender, but they have a neutral gender. They have a 3rd gender, which is neutral, and you can use it at will. Now, Spanish, for example, they do use male and female for a wide variety of things. In fact, in Spanish, penis is female. Believe it or not, it's la penga. Female. I have no idea why. But a boat is female. And when you're talking about a boat, you can say she. Now, we do that a bit in English. So we can say, isn't she a gorgeous, isn't she a beaut? Isn't that a gorgeous boat? But we still have some reservations about she to she or he to, like, you wouldn't say he for a book. In Russian, Spanish, you can do that just fine. Now, it is the closest neutral that we have, but you can't use that for a human being in English. In Spanish, other languages, you absolutely can. The other one is the royal you and what I call the royal we. Technically, there is no royal we, but I refer to it as that way. So the royal you would be, if I were to say, you can go to work on X, Y, and Z days if you want to, and you can take a couple days off. You shouldn't have to worry about it. I can say that, not mean you, John, in particular. What I'm saying is the royal you. I mean, one can do it. But in English, that sounds, one can go to work, one could take a few days off, and one shouldn't have to worry about it. That sounds extraordinarily, so 3 genders, male, female, and the neutral. So to say one sounds in English extraordinarily awkward. I use it sometimes just because it's a useful construct. And if you say you piss people off, because sometimes you think they're talking about the amount of confusion that you have when you sit there and say you. And you don't mean you, the person I'm talking to. You mean you as in one person, any one. In other languages, they do that great. English doesn't do that. We don't have a neutral. That's why we've been using the plural they. I hate doing that. I've done it on occasion, but you know how, like, if somebody has not identified as a gender nowadays, especially on Twitter, most people say they.
Mm-hmm.
They is plural. I'm sorry, I'm a snob about it. They is plural.
Well, no, that's not completely correct.
No, now it's accepted usage. I know.
Well, no, it's not even a matter of recent acceptance. Singular they has been in the English language for decades, if not centuries. I mean, but yeah, Google it. I mean, not to disagree with you, but
I'll Google it. This will be the first I've heard of it.
Yeah, but, the singular usage of they has been around for quite a while. It's not a recent advent by any stretch of the imagination. So I know what you're talking about too before that, because like you can make a statement using the word you, like you can always do this, that, or the other. And what you're speaking of is the general you of anybody that's a you, and then it can be misconstrued. It can be misconstrued as if you're talking about that particular individual. I see that happen a lot. And now when it comes to the royal we, so we hear that a lot in entertainment, like in movies and stuff like that. So are you saying that really isn't a thing? Like the scenario I can think of off the top of my head is like in a period picture movie or something where like the monarch will say, "We are not amused." Is that's something that is made up for?
It exists. It's just not called the royal we. The royal you. There's a royal you. There is no royal we. There you can use we that way. It's just not called the royal we. And in the Queen's English, what's used in the Queen's English versus what we use today is really quite different. To get a really good sense, I loved Deadwood. In fact, actually, you can see I've got a whole bunch of stuff up there. And you can see right above the judge's gavel, right above that, you can see the Deadwood poster. It's the orange. It's hard to see. It's above the gavel. I love Deadwood. It was one of the best television shows, I think, ever.
Nick, let me tell you something.
Yes.
For more than a decade, I've been saying that on my deathbed, when they ask me what my biggest regret is, my answer will be that Deadwood only ran for 3 seasons. It was, without a doubt, one of the greatest television shows ever.
Absolutely.
As a matter of fact, I've been thinking about running through it again, although I've watched the complete series maybe 4 times over, the last, 15 years. Amazing television program.
And language features heavily in that. First of all, it's all Queen's English. And it's gorgeous language, unbelievable. But one of my favorites is when Wu comes to talk to Swearingen. Now, Wu doesn't speak any English. He's been learning swears from Swearingen. So he can just about talk in swears, but they always just say, okay, you need to talk to Al, don't talk to us. We got no idea what you're saying. So at one point, Wu and Swearingen have a conversation, and basically the entire conversation is done with the word cocksucker. That's it. The entire, so like Wu is like, cocksucker. And it's like, okay, so the small cocksucker got mad at the big cock. cocksucker. Okay, so now you think that he's a cocksucker because it's like, now which cocksucker did this? Cocksucker. Okay. Let's just try to. And it's just this entire, and it's a good example of almost sort of words as metaphors that you don't in many cases, and I did some acting in high school, and you don't need. In many cases, the verbal language is just one of the ways in which we communicate. And if for some reason you're stifled in that, there's so many other ways to do it. And if you look at me, I'm always very expressive. I mean, I communicate with my hands, I communicate with my body language, and it's just one of those things that the oral language is only a small part of our communication. But that's why Twitter and the internet can be so unbelievably dangerous, because you don't have any of the verbal, the auditory cues. You don't have any of the visual cues. So you don't know what somebody's saying. So instead, your brain is trying to, if somebody says, have a nice day, your brain tries to figure out, well, do they mean, have a nice day? Do they mean, have a nice day? Hey, have a nice day. Same. I just said three completely different things. I said three completely different things. Same words. The other one that I often use when I teach is she has blonde hair. She has blonde hair. She has blonde hair. She has blonde hair. Same sentence. Now on Twitter, you can't tell the difference between any of those sentences, but they mean different things. And when all of that's denied to us, we start to impose, our brain is still looking for the maximal context that we can get. So we start to put in what we hope is true, what we think maybe is true based on our ego, so on and so forth. This is why so many people, they fall in love on the internet and then they meet the person like, oh my God, I hate this person. The reason is because they were reading into these phrases what they wanted to see and what they wanted to hear, and it was just completely. Language is a mess. Language is an absolute mess. It's a miracle we communicate at all. And in fact, you lose so much of the communication just in terms of a general discussion. And when you're not applying any charity at all, and I'm sure you've seen this before, when people are either deliberately removing charity, if you want to straw man someone, it gets real easy, especially on Twitter or anything like that, because anything could be taken to mean any way you want. So language becomes a nightmare, especially when it's used like a weapon in that sense. And it's been that way. That's actually the practice of law too. So in some cases, is using language like a weapon. It's unfortunate, but it is.
So in the examples you gave, it's not only inflection and the auditory clues, but the facial cues are different too.
Yes.
I mean, if you say, she has blonde hair, you're speaking like an incredulous statement, then your face is going to read differently than if you say she has blonde hair. So yeah, it not just on Twitter, but in any textual format, it makes it difficult to discern the actual meaning. And I see many misunderstandings going on because people, don't know. As a matter of fact, was it, I believe it might've been last night on a stream with, it was either on the Nakasuchi stream last night or it was on the GDC stream that we did last night. And two people in chat, one person made a joke, which I clearly discerned as a joke, just because I knew the individual who had posted it pretty well and knew their humor that they use all the time. Yep. But the person that they had directed it at didn't realize it was a joke. And of course, then it didn't really turn into a big row or anything, but they, of course, then messaged them, well, what do you mean by that? And had it been, the exchange happened in person, there most likely would have been no misunderstanding at all, because they would have seen the facial cues and the auditory clues, the inflection of the statement.
I was on Moscow radio, and this was one of my proudest moments. I was on Moscow radio, and the group that had gone over to visit Russia or the Soviet Union. We were all there, and they loved the idea that a bunch of American high school students are coming over here. But I was the only one who spoke Russian, so it ended up being that I was the one doing most of the talking. But one of the things was, our group was supposed to meet up with 16 Russian students, and it was supposed to be from a local school. Well, it turned out to instead come from a local all-girls school. And so there's 5 guys in the group, 5 girls in our group, and 16 girls in the other group. And so the guy on the radio said, okay, and so there was a confusion, and you guys ended up with this horrible situation where you've got this all-girls school that's joined you. And I said in Russian, well, you may think it's a horrible situation, but there's a number of people here who disagree with you. And everybody just burst out laughing. Humor, that's when I knew I spoke Russian. That's when I knew, when you can tell a joke in another language and people get it. Joking is the pinnacle of the ability to communicate, is to express a joke and make it. And that's why that's why when they're going to Pompeii, they look at the bathroom stalls, they look at to try to get the culture, they try to look at the actual way, the humor and or sort of what is usually considered crass behavior. But this is who we are. This is how we express ourselves. But humor is the easiest to screw up, and we screw it up in our own language all the damn time. How many friendships have been lost over a joke that was just poof? Yeah, and doing it in another language. That's how you know. That's the informal. As a guy who used to do translation, that's the informal judge of how somebody can speak the language. Can they tell a joke in it spontaneously, not like a prepared joke, and get everyone to laugh?
Well, and I don't know if I'm right here, but I believe that the reason that that would be true is because when you talk about humor, that is really tied into human abstract thinking. And if you can tie, your command of another language into and kickstart, people's abstract thinking, then yeah, I can see why that would be true. That you would have a command of that language if you could tell jokes in that language, because you wouldn't have to just know the language. You would have to know like a lot of the idioms and phrases and
and the general culture.
Right, and the culture. Yeah, absolutely. So I think I already asked you this. So you talked about being in Russia. Are there any other countries that you've visited?
I was in Argentina. I've been in a few other. I'm sorry, what?
Is that Spanish speaking, or is it?
Yes, it is. It's Spanish speaking. Well, I loved it in Argentina. I really loved it in Argentina. Argentina's a spectacular place. I've been to a number of other countries. I was in Greece. I didn't have time to learn Greek. So like I said, my father practiced law in 6 languages. I have a tendency to just pick up languages. If you put me anywhere near a language, I just watch and see how people are using it, and I start to pick up, usually based on whatever words, and I can usually start to speak it pretty quickly. Now my wife was doing sort of Greek audio tapes, and I was starting to pick it up, but I was in the middle of I couldn't do it. But the Greeks use the same alphabet as the Russian. It's the Cyrillic alphabet. So she ended up learning a lot of the language. I could read it. She couldn't. So together, what we could do is I could read something off the menu, and she could say, "Oh, this says that. This says." So she can't read it. So, between the two of us, I could do all the reading. She could do all the turn the sounds into whatever on earth they meant. But no, the only 2 places that, in terms of the actual languages I speak, would be Argentina and the Soviet Union.
Yeah, like I said, I was really hoping that because you had said you had known Japanese at one point, and then over the years you've lost your much of your ability in that. You did spit a few Japanese phrases at me before we started, but Japan fascinates me. The language fascinates me, and if I was going to travel somewhere, out of the country. That would probably be the place I would want to go to first.
That's one, and I regret losing the Japanese. Japanese is a bit on the tougher side, and the other thing is, so if I find someone I think speaks a foreign language that I speak, I try to engage with them in that language. It's the only way to keep it fresh. I don't have time to study it, so it's just if I find somebody, if I hear a Russian accent, I'll usually engage and see if they speak Russian. Now, this can actually offend some people, because especially if they're from Russia, sometimes they really just want to forget. They don't want to. And a lot of times, too, they come from a society of secret police, so they assume I'm working for the CIA. I shit you not. They do. The number of looks that I get, there's nothing I can say that's going to, so I just talk with them a little bit. Usually they kind of back away and they're like, thank you, very nice American, bye. They really are suspicious of it, and they have every right to be, considering where they come from. But every now and then, I'll find one that I can talk with, and we'll carry on a conversation for a half hour, 45 minutes. That's why I haven't lost it. Same thing with Spanish. Where I live, there are not a lot of Japanese speakers, so I didn't get the opportunity. After about 10 years of basically not speaking a word, for the most part, I lost it all.
Well, and that brings up a good point. As far as now, you learn Spanish because you were at the stage of your life where our brains are most like a sponge, soaking up knowledge and everything. And I would have to say, hearing your description of why you learned Spanish first, that you learned Spanish through what they would call an immersion method.
Yeah.
And Russian you learned later when you were in college through a rote or educational method, or whatever you want to term it. What do you think? I mean, if you're going to learn a new language, is it better, you think, just to dive in and immerse yourself in it and try and just talk to people that speak that language, or it might be bilingual?
It's very difficult to say anything when it comes to the human species as a categorical. As close to a categorical as I can get, better immersion, 100%. That is how we learn. Now, there are a few people who are an exception to this. My wife is one of them. She's got a PhD in biochemistry. She memorizes things like nobody's business. She just boom, 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 boom. I can't memorize any. I cannot memorize.
Didactic memory. She has.
Yeah. She no. She doesn't. She doesn't have an eidetic memory, or she's not. But she does have to focus to do it. But she can do it, and she can memorize huge, and she doesn't get bored by it. My brain just wanders. I get bored very quickly. So for her, when she is learning another language, she gets so frustrated by the immersion she can't function. But you let her memorize it, poof. For most people, for 90% of people, the best way to learn is through immersion in some way or another. And it doesn't help. This is one reason. It also helps, it helps people to understand. Yeah, Czechs do not want people speaking Russian to them. Yeah, thanks, Misha. Thanks for explaining that one. You could have told me that 3 or 4 years ago. I figured that one out the hard way. Well, most people don't want neither do the Polish. Now, most Poles speak Russian. The reason is because it was required in school. Nowadays, I don't think it is, but it was for a very long time. And so they do not appreciate that. So, and it's funny because, especially when I was younger, I did not necessarily have the sensitivity. I was like, hey, look, I need to speak so I don't lose the language. Why don't you let me speak in this? We could be speaking in English or in Russian. Let's speak in Russian so that I can hold on to the language. And when they'd say, no, I'm not going to speak Russian. Thank you. I'm just like, why not? I don't get it. I don't understand. Yeah. When you understand the history, and you understand, you're like, oh, okay. I really should have had a bit more sensitivity there. But, at any rate, immersion is the best way to do it. That's the way I do it. The other thing is I pick up accents, just completely by accident. In fact, I have to, if I get tired, first of all, I either will slip into I'll often slip into a Southern accent. I have no idea why, but I'll slip into a Southern accent, Alabama usually. Or if I get really tired, I do just suddenly want to start speaking Spanish, even though I can't. I just start to, my brain just starts to go into Spanish when I'm tired. Now, or in certain emotional states, I would just prefer to be speaking Spanish. But again, that's probably because it was my first language. I was in Alabama for a couple of weeks, and I was at the Space Academy, NASA Space Academy program, and after about 3 days, I picked up an Alabama accent. And a lot of them are like, "Oh, you're trying to make fun of us? We know this isn't your accent. Why are you speaking like that?" I was just like, so I have to fight to not do it, and I just have to concentrate to not pick up the accent and not start speaking in it. And finally, I just gave up and did it, and it offended people. I was not just like, guys, you know. Now, there are, I think the U.S. is broken up into, I think, 7 cultural regions: Northern Appalachia, Yankdom, Midwest, Pacific, and each of these are different cultures. And they, again, when you get back into, so English isn't spoken the same in any of these, and the way we interact is different. It's amazing how much culture. And if you think, spend some time in Massachusetts, then go to California, 2 completely different cultures. Different jokes will play differently there. So even within English, there's a concept in there's a concept in language that basically no 2 people speak the same language. No 2 people speak the same language. It's been my experience that's true. We're close enough that we can get along, but this gets back to, if somebody speaks in Czechoslovakian and you have Russian, can you? Yeah, usually you've got enough to, but it's about decoding, and that's all about it, that it is. And when I speak to, when I speak to friends from the inner city in a state that's 3,000 miles away, there's a different decoding process that goes on. Roughly the same, but.
So, I don't know what you might know about it, because I know zero about it, but do you know anything about why there is the phenomenon of people who speak the same language will have different accents in different regions? Is it just simply a regional thing?
Yeah, like I said, language is almost essentially a living thing. It's often referred to as a living thing. I think that's a fair way to phrase it. It changes. It changes reasonably rapidly, but it changes depending on a number of factors, especially over time. Also over where the influence comes from. New Mexico, Texas has a very different influence. I mean, the Dutch settled in the Northeast, so did the Brits, so did the French in the Northeast. That has influenced both the way that the language develops there. Also, especially in Massachusetts. I mean, if you take a look at the Boston accent, which is a famous, I grew up in Boston. I don't have the Boston accent, but that's heavily influenced by Irish.
Park the County, yeah.
Yeah, well, there was a huge influx of Irish immigrants, and when actually everybody does start to, like I said, I'm particularly vulnerable, may or may not be. I just absorb the whatever I often absorb the idioms. My wife hates it. I got a buddy of mine named Mark. He swears every other word. And she can always tell when I've been hanging out with him for more than 2 hours, because I pick that up. And I just start, and then I just start, and I'm swearing every other word, and I pick up his speech patterns and all this other stuff. We actually all do that. I unconsciously do it more than most, but we all do that. And so over time, we all sort of, there's homeostasis. It's almost like a homeostasis. It's like you take a population, you add a whole bunch of Irish immigrants. The more of them there are, the more their idioms, the more their accent is going to influence the overall accent and shift it into that direction. If there's only a few, you're not going to see a shift. If there's a huge number, you're gonna have a noticeable shift, especially over a larger period of time. So, like I said, I think the U.S. is considered to be broken up into, I think, 7 different linguistic regions as a result, and that's, there you go.
Well, and apparently we're having problems with the live chat. Keeps crashing on folks. I noticed that there hasn't been a comment posted in a number of minutes. We are still live, though. I checked on that. But it must be YouTube issues today.
YouTube is not nearly as stable as people give it credit for.
No, YouTube is great, but there are a lot of things about the administration of it that just boggles my mind.
Tony
So,
had said something in the live chat. This is interesting. He said, "I always know I was becoming fluent when I dreamed in a language." That's an interesting observation. Here's a question, though: is he dreaming in the language, or is he interpreting that when he wakes up? And I think there isn't an answer on that yet. But what if basically what's happening is when you dream, there's no language, there's just communication. You think there's language. I mean, there's a lot of things that sort of feels like they're really happening in a dream. You think people are talking, but are they not? You don't know. Then you wake up and your brain interprets the language on top of whatever the communication was, but that it was actually a nonverbal communication. Now, for most intents and purposes, that would be the exact same thing. And again, what he said is actually perfectly. I mean, he's right. I think that's a marvelous way to judge. But I like to take that one step further and go: are you really dreaming in that language, or do you know the language well enough that when you wake up, your brain is able to interpret what was happening in that language, and you sort of feel like you did? The result is the same thing. When that process happens, he's right. When that process happens, I think that means you really have a good grasp of the language. But it's interesting because what language do we dream in? There's some people who say that you do dream in a language. I tend to think we don't. I think we just sort of think we do. We impose it on. Once we woke up, we've imposed it on. But that's me.
So that leads me to a question. So when you are speaking another language, are you still, well, you said your first language was Spanish. Are you in your brain? Are you thinking of what you're about to say in English or Spanish, or are you simply speaking Russian or whatever?
I'm just speaking them. In fact, I can switch languages midstream. So, we can have a conversation. Если я хочу, я могу разговаривать русский язык. Or puedo hablar en español también, and then I can go right back into English. And it doesn't matter. It's just I don't have the language in my head. I just have what I want to say, and then just whatever language I want to speak just pops out. So that was I was speaking English, and then mid-sentence I switched to Russian, and then mid-sentence I switched to Spanish, and then mid-sentence switched right back to English again.
And so it's just the concepts are in your head, and then it comes out verbally in whatever language you choose to have it come out.
Должен быть переводиться, если я хочу, si yo quiero comprender, si quiero hablar, I just need to be able to think about it, about the translation of the thoughts into the. Yes, so I just have to think about the translation. I have the thought, and then I just say, well, which language do I want to use? Okay, I'll use this one. Okay, well, let's switch to this one, and then whatever.
So you did say that when it comes to Japanese and French, that you don't really have a command of those two, just a basic ability of it. But you did, spew a few phrases at me. So we're going to start wrapping things up here. So just and we've already had a wonderful demonstration of English during this, but
so much to everybody's surprise. I know. Thank you, John.
And just so everybody knows. If you didn't catch the what the title was referring to, not off the rack, that was a callback to recently Nick being labeled Nick $400 suitor, and so that was just my little tongue in cheek.
Спасибо большое. Иди славную яйца качат. Спасибо.
So what did you just say?
I said, go swing off an elephant's balls.
Oh shit! And that was, of course, Russian. Say something in Japanese.
日本語ちょっとわかりません.
And what was that?
I can't. I just said I barely understand it. I said in Japanese. I said Japanese. I barely understand it. But also, I used to be able to. One of the keys to being able to speak languages well is focusing on your mouth and realizing where the language is spoken. Japanese is spoken entirely on the front. That's another one where, if you're trying to speak Japanese, you push everything as far to the front of your mouth as you can. But again, you do it. People sometimes think you're trying to make fun of the language. Japanese won't do it; they'll recognize it. But it's like when you go, "Chotto wakarimasen." You tighten your mouth up at chotto. It's all the way right up at the front of the mouth. But because in the U.S. we have so little experience with foreign languages. In fact, we're suspicious of people who study foreign languages. We really are in the U.S. We do not like it, and we think they're it's like, why study another language when English is really enough? That's the attitude here, and so you just got to be a little careful with it. You can get yourself into trouble.
Do you think a second language should be a requirement of primary education?
I don't know if it should be a requirement. I think it should be sort of a de facto requirement. I think it should be assumed you're gonna study multiple languages. I object to it as a requirement on a couple of grounds, but I think we are hurting ourselves by not if you want the best insight you can into how, this is one reason why I want to study Arabic or Farsi. I want to know how these people think and the best way to do. That's the same reason I studied Russia. The first phrase I ever learned in Russia was "Дайте мне пиво, пожалуйста," which is "Please give me a beer." Now the Russians, they had their prohibition right during World War II. Misha Griffin's going to appreciate this one. They had prohibition, their version of prohibition during World War II. Their planes started crashing, and nobody could figure out why. Also had some people going blind. Then they figured it out. People were bleeding off the alcohol from the brake lines on the planes and drinking that, and then the planes would crash when they were landing. Oof. So in order to help win World War II, they repealed their prohibition, so that kind of thing would stop. The alcohol is very big. I was 14, I think, when I was over there, and handing me just a bottle of vodka was no biggie to them. They're just like, "Here you go, this vodka, have fun." It was like, "Whoa!"
Yeah, they probably would have, even if you had been 12 years old, they'd probably be handing you the bottle.
I think no problem. Yeah, probably 8 would be the minimum where they start, unofficially, and smoking too. Yeah.
And you said in Japanese that you barely understand it or something that it reminded me of something. And of course, I can't remember much of it at all. I took Spanish, back in high school. I remember one time years ago. I was somewhere in public, perhaps on a bus or a train, and a couple people were speaking Spanish, and they were, their discussion wasn't all about me, but they talked shit about me a little bit. And I turned to them and I said, "Mi hable español poquito." And just the looks on their face were, "Oh shit, we're busted," So how about can you spit something at us in French?
No, probably not. I can understand French, but speaking it on command is probably beyond my ability right now.
Okay, and give us your final thoughts in Spanish as best you can.
Muchas gracias. Estaba muy bueno. Me gusta mucho. I was about to say merci. I was about to get into French. Oh my God, without even trying. Pero gracias muchísimo. Y I was going to say I look forward to next time, but now I'm thinking in Russian. Now I am having it because I'm starting to get tired, I guess.
That's okay.
Muchas gracias también.
Yeah, and that's okay. You did forewarn me before we started that you were a little tired, and that if I tasked you on speaking the languages, that you might not be able to pull it up as quick. But that's okay. So is there anything that you have coming up on In Time or elsewhere that you want folks to know about?
Oh, yeah. Well, we got 604 Atheist on In Time on Tuesday, and then we got Aaron Ra. He's going to be telling us his deconversion story on In Time Thursday, and I'm looking forward to that. We are looking forward to having Dr. Misha Griffin on as well, but I think Aaron Ra is the biggie I think we're all looking forward to on Thursday. And we do have a couple other people we're working on, but he's obviously we're all looking forward to seeing him.
And those are your regular nights or regular days. I mean, Tuesdays and
Thursdays usually. Yep.
Usually at around 2 p.m. Eastern.
Yep, you got it.
And you might have noticed in some of the other streams I do on Nakasuchi's channel, on A Raging Atheist, and on the GDC, that Nick has joins me often. So be looking for him on there as well. want to thank Maya and Tony and Misha and Chemo for coming to see us today. Dave McGinnis was here, and thank you to everybody who took their time to come and watch this. It was fun talking to you, Nick.
Thank you so much for having. I think this is a great series, and I really appreciate you having me on. So thank you very much.
And there'll be more to come in the future. And again, thank you to everybody for stopping by. Please don't forget, and I will put it in the video description, and it is in the live chat back there. I'll try and post it one more time here. Please go over to Puff's GoFundMe, and if you can, help him out with paying for his father's funeral. His father passed last week suddenly, and he's having a tough time paying for the funeral. And please also share the link to the GoFundMe on social media. It would be a really big help for him. It's just, I lost my father years ago, so I can relate to what he must be going through right now. Burying a loved one is difficult in many ways, financially being one of them if you're not prepared for it. So again, thanks to Nick for being here. Most likely be back here next Sunday afternoon with episode 7. With who yet? I'm not sure. Maybe Dave McGinnis. Maybe Richard Madsen.
Or Ansgar.
Sure. Or Ansgar.
I bet I could arrange that.
You'll just have to wait and see. But everybody have a great rest of your weekend, and we'll see you soon.